Hello everyone, welcome to the Green Man channel. Now it's been a while since I've spoken about Stormlight Archive series. I apologise for that if you were following the earlier little series of videos I did on the Way of Kings. But now I'm in a position to start to talk about Words of Radiance, as I've read part one of this book. Or at least the version I have seems to split Words of Radiance into two, so I've got a part one book and also a part two book still to read, so I'm only halfway through in effect. But I liked the continuation of the story very much so far. We seem to have sort of, now that Kaladin is sort of in the court of, these royals, who's been, given this duty to protect them at all costs with his bridge crew. And he is now getting a closer relationship with people like Dalinar and Adolin. Seeing a bit of tension, a bit of rivalry develop between those two characters, which is quite interesting. And it seems like we are being more sort of drawn into Kaladin and his backstory, learning more about his abilities and the challenges he actually has with those, whilst also having this role of protector of the king, King Elkhart, and of High Prince Dalinar. There's some really fascinating little relationships going on within this story, I think, and I enjoyed as well, sort of in parallel, all the focus on Shallan, as we see her sort of development with new challenges of basically losing Jasna, as she seems to be assassinated, and so to escape, Shallan has to use her powers, then ends up winding up with a couple of interesting characters, including Tyne, who was actually the person who went to assassinate Jasna, so we find that out. And then, Shallan obviously is faced with this really difficult situation and is forced to, spoiler alert, kill Tyne. So I love the stuff with Shallan here and Kaladin. They even meet, they're even brought together, and I like that in stories and epic fantasy when one character who's had a different path from the other, suddenly their paths meet. They're drawn together like it was meant to happen. You could see Sanderson, I think, had been teasing this in Way of Kings, that these two characters were going to be very much the focus of this story. And here we see it actually happen, but they don't get off to a great start, which I think is, an interesting little twist, where Kaladin's actually fooled by Shallan and forced to hand over his pair of boots. So there's that as well here. Some little comic moments, some entertaining little moments in this, which I like the way Sanderson uses a bit of the humour here and there as well. And his characters are always quite fun, as well as having the sort of serious, treacherous, or more nasty characters. There's always some fun, I think, in his interplay between characters. I like, what else did I enjoy? So yeah, I liked the sort of these ghosts, as we're discovering more about the Ghost Bloods, seemingly these assassins and their involvements in the story. Obviously, this book, as I think I mentioned at the start, it seems more focused on political intrigues and the relationships of characters within the sort of royal court of, El-Hakar. It seems more focused on that in this story than so much on the Parshendi and the Shattered Plains activities that we had in the first book, where, you have, a lot of battles going on and fighting, if that's more your thing. This book may come as slightly as a come down, but in the best way possible. I think this book really was needed for me to start to see more into these characters and their motivations a bit more. And I think in the first book you kind of got quite a lot of action, but those sort of things were teased. So it feels like Words of Radiance gives you a bit more of an insight into character backgrounds as opposed to being as action focused. Although you still get action sequences and a fair number of these kind of smaller scale ones, I think, in this story. And Jules, of course, the Adolin-Kaladin rivalry comes to the forefront much more in this story, or in this book, seemingly so far. Obviously, I still have part two to read, I should emphasise that. And I liked sort of there's something about Adeline, and I can't help but think of Jaime Lannister when I'm reading about Adeline or his character coming up, because he seems to have this certain arrogance to him, but a bit of a vulnerable underside as well, a bit of an insecurity about him too. But I think he probably uses arrogance, and it just reminds me a lot of the Jaime Lannister character from Game of Thrones. Whether there was any inspiration there when Sanderson was writing about Adeline, whether that was an inspiration for Adeline, I just wonder that. Be interested to know your thoughts on that, actually, if you happen to be watching this video and you're you're thinking of making a comment or whatever. Yeah, I mean, do you agree with that? Do you think I'm completely sort of out of, completely wrong with that or whatever? I'm just interested to know. Just for me, it reminds me a bit of Jaime Lannister for some reason. I guess he kind of has that son of a king, or son of Dalinar, High Prince. In fact, he might be in that sort of high position, yet he has that bit of vulnerability about him. He's arrogant and confident. Seems to he's also, of course, very involved with Shallan, because he's got this conditional betrothal thing going on to her, where it seems like they may marry at a later stage. So sure about that, but that's another point in the story which could really develop too, and perhaps even bring together more of that rivalry between Adeline and Kaladin. I don't know, but that could be another development of this story. There's lots of places. You see, I'm starting to see that there are lots of places this series could go with the different characters now. Obviously, a lot seems to revolve around Shallan and Kaladin at the moment. Dalinar hasn't been quite as in focus, I think, as he was in The Way of Kings. He's been slightly more on a back seat in this book so far. And I liked his character, so I would like to see him come back again and get more involved again, because I thought his character was really, really interesting in the first book, and he was one of my sort of favourite, almost one of my favourite characters with all of his conflicts and inner conflicts even, and all the things he had to deal with. Kind of made for me like one of those characters in an epic fantasy that carries just a massive amount of weight on their shoulders, but lots of characters in these kind of novels tend to have those kind of responsibilities. So anyway, starting to digress a bit. So yeah, I really enjoyed part 1 of book 2, Words of Radiance. Need to obviously get to reading part 2 quickly, and hopefully I will not take as long to sort of make progress with this series as I have been doing. I think it's been difficult, when I'm kind of trying to make this channel, more than one thing, I guess, and that's the challenge here, is that obviously I find it a lot easier to do music listening than I do to read through books, I think, generally. So particularly long books that require that time and attention. So apologies for that, but I'm going to stick with Stormlight Archive, however long it takes. I'm definitely going to stick with it because I'm enjoying it so far. Thanks all for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Do feel free to like and subscribe if any of this takes your interest, particularly if you're also partial to things like, heavy metal. I'm also going to be doing a bit more on sci-fi and horror as this channel moves forwards, just like branching it out a little bit more. And I hope you all have good Sundays. Take care, everybody. Goodbye.